All right. So just going back to the beginning, of course, people, know of your history, that you started very young in entertainment. A lot of child actors, like, sort of that spark that they always go back to is, I was a very outgoing child. I was always, in people's faces and putting on shows in my living room and stuff like that. Was that you?
No, I mean, actually, I'm considered a late bloomer for a child actor because I started acting when I was almost in junior high school. So, even though people, I was in Beaches when I was 12, that came out when I was 13, but I had just started acting about a year before that. So most child actors that you think of have actually been acting since they're toddlers. And that's a very different kind of personality. It's a different kind of structure to how you're raised and the expectations on you. So I had a normal elementary school kind of life. I was active in school plays. I felt comfortable in drama class, when we had to do plays and stuff. But I was not a hammy kid. I wasn't an exceptionally outgoing or theatrical kid. I would meet other actors or child actors, and they were very theatrical and always kind of on, and that wasn't me at all.
Okay. You didn't start as young as others, but you did start relatively young. You started before your teens, which is sort of a danger zone for a lot of people that we've seen in the past. There's always the pitfalls that, we read about different younger celebrities falling into. You managed to avoid all that, but I guess the question is why? How did you manage to be so well balanced throughout everything?
Well, I think part of it is that I wasn't in the industry for my formative years, so I had a different kind of perspective on it.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, when people start acting and they're always kind of given expectations and, given sort of positive reinforcement for being good and negative reinforcement for not obeying directors, direction, I think that sets up kind of a complicated system. I mean, for me, I came from, my parents are first-generation Americans, so I come from a pretty strict kind of immigrant sort of mentality. My parents tried to still have me do chores and all the normal things and homework and all the things that kids do. I wasn't emancipated, which a lot of, teenagers at 15 get to be considered legal adults if they're in the acting world, and my parents didn't do that, which I think was smart. But, for me, I wasn't really a party person, so I wasn't seeing drugs and alcohol. And I think I was also really lucky that on Floss was set. I was 14 to 19, and I never saw anyone drinking or doing drugs. We had a very clean set, and I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, at that point when you started, you had more of a formative idea, I guess, of what you wanted to do, starting a little bit older than other child actors. But what was your goals at that time? Who were your role models? What kind of career did you set out to have?
I didn't think of having a career. I mean, I knew that I liked acting in school plays, and I thought that meant I should be an actress. Kids do commercials and stuff like that. I had no idea that I would have my own television show by the time I was 14. None of that was part of any grand plan at all. There's so many talented kids in the industry. I mean, there's so many talented adults. The chances of succeeding are so rare. So I didn't see any of that. It really kind of just happened very quickly. Once I got Beaches, I felt like everything kind of snowballed, and all of a sudden I went from just being this kid who liked acting to a person with their own TV show.
Okay. I just wanted to mention a couple quick things just because I thought it was fun looking back at your resume. Some of your early roles are definitely things that people wouldn't expect you, looking at your work now, to have been in, but just if you have any quick memories of some of these things. According to what I read, your first role was in a horror movie called Pumpkinhead. Do you remember that?
I had 5 lines. I mean, when you start acting, you kind of get, sent out for any audition, and, it was a very small part, because you don't get big parts when you first start.
Right.
And it was like 5 lines in a movie. I didn't have typical success as most child actors do in commercials and things, because in 1986, when I started acting, there was a notion that people on television needed to look what was called All-American, and I didn't look All-American. I've always had prominent features, and I've always looked ethnic. So I ended up doing a lot of character roles after that in things like Webster and Fact of Life. But I didn't have typical success in commercials, so that's why there's quirky things on my resume. Because as a character actress, you do quirky things instead of generic commercials.
Right, right. I also saw you were on, I guess that at that time they had a version of Beauty and the Beast, a TV show.
Yeah, it was with Ron Perlman. It was actually it was Whit Thomas produced it. They were the producers who did Blossom eventually.
Oh.
But yeah, it was Ron Perlman played Beast, and yeah, it was very interesting. Again, that was just a small part.
And did that, because from what I read, you were like a girl who lived in the sewers or something like that. And that's,
Yeah.
but did that connection sort of get you in the door to be considered for Blossom?
I mean, it was years later, I did that when I was 11, and then Blossom didn't come about until after Beaches came out. So it was a couple years later, but I guess it's possible.
Interesting. Now, Beaches is probably the first really big thing that people always remember you for. How much did you know about, like, the significance of Bette Midler and the fact that you'd be playing a younger version of her? Did you realize, like, how big of a deal that was at the time?
Not really. My parents had always said I looked like Bette Midler and Barbra Streisand, so I knew who she was. I had seen some of her, movies, but I didn't really grasp the full notion that, like, I'd be on a big screen and people would be saying, like, for your consideration for awards and things like that. But I knew who she was, and I don't know, I didn't really think I looked like her. I thought I looked like myself with a red wig.
Did you think that, because, the movie came out, but I mean, we still talk about it and look back on it years later. Did you realize at any point that this movie would have such a long-lasting reputation for being just sort of that ultimate, I mean, kind of like that drama, that sob story that people go to when they want a good cry?
No, not really. I mean, I think I've only maybe seen it all the way through once at the premiere.
Okay.
Yeah, but I look, Bette Midler's had a huge following and a significant following, especially in the gay community. So she's so beloved, and that movie captured a lot of fun things. But also there was some really strong acting in it, so I can see it. It's not my kind of movie.
Gotcha. Same here, but definitely a big deal. So Blossom, of course, your big the coming out party as a star, the star of the show. Just looking back on it generally, and I'm sure it changed throughout the years the show was on, but how much of that experience for you was about the work versus what may have even been the distraction of how much attention you guys were getting as stars and being in that teen?
I think people don't realize, looking back, that our show was not a top 10 show. Our show was not even a top 20 show. We didn't get that much attention like people do now. We also did that show at a time when there was no internet, and most people didn't even have personal computers. So the notion of celebrity as something fascinating or people caring what we wore on red carpets, it literally didn't exist.
Huh.
So I think a lot of people don't realize that, of course, we got recognized everywhere we went because, if you go places where young people are, they're going to recognize you. But it wasn't the same thing like being on the Big Bang Theory. And there was no notion of anyone caring what our personal lives were like. It wasn't like that then. So it felt very intense because I was a teenager and those were kind of the hardest years of your life. So to live them publicly is very hard. But it wasn't fame like people think of fame now.
It's funny because I remember those days, and I remember when they rolled out Joey Lawrence's music video during the airing of Blossom. Right. And thinking like, oh, this is it. Like, Mayim's next. When's her album coming out?
No, not my thing.
Wasn't going to happen.
No.
So looking back at Blossom, it was kind of an edgy show in a way because it hit on a lot of different topics that quote unquote family shows don't usually touch. Is that kind of a source of pride, or was that back then like a source of pride for your cast that you were able to sort of push the envelope?
Yeah, I mean, the premise of our show, was was sort of controversial in and of itself. The older brother's character was a recovering drug addict and alcoholic on the show. And it was something that we talked about a lot more in the earlier episodes, and then it sort of just became part of the fabric of the show. But even that was a huge fight with the network. Like, to have a character who had done drugs, like, that's crazy. Whereas now, like, people do drugs on television, you know? Like, things are so different. But we definitely, you know, we talked about things that were important to teenagers because they were important. We talked about drugs, and we talked about safe sex, and all those things were considered so racy then. But, you know, Don Rio, who created our show, wanted to make a show that was like a modern-day Catcher in the Rye, like a real coming-of-age story, and they didn't want to sugarcoat a lot of things. And, of course, there was always a happy ending. I mean, it was a sitcom, and it was entertainment. But we are proud that we did an episode about a guy trying to force himself on Blossom on a date. We did an episode about someone smacking Blossom's butt and her not liking it. Like, those were really cool episodes for us to do.
Mm-hmm. Do you think maybe part of the reason the show wasn't quite as successful as it was good is because maybe it was a little bit ahead of its time?
No, I just think the industry was different then. You know, there was a very specific idea of what women should look like on TV, and you know, the fact that we had a show that was based around a girl was considered almost impossible. They tried to convince Don Rio, you know, not to do it. And I think that, you know, we see lots of girls on television now, and we see lots of women in leading roles. That was not the case in 1990 when we did Blossom. There were no other shows about girls. There was Clarissa Explains It All, which was a cable kids show, and there was, you know, Punky Brewster was a show about a little girl, and that was an afternoon show. But for a primetime show to name a series after a girl was unheard of at that time.
Okay. So just looking past Blossom, of course, there's sort of this big gap of time where you focused on other things, and you were popping up in projects here and there, but no longer really full-time into your acting career. Did you feel like there was sort of a loss of passion for that kind of work from you? Were you okay with moving away from that for those periods?
Yeah, I made a conscious decision to leave acting because I wanted to pursue a degree in neuroscience. So, you know, I had other interests, as everyone tends to, and you know, I think women in particular should be encouraged to, you know, do lots of different things, try different things, and especially with the underrepresentation of women in science, like, it felt like an amazing opportunity. So I took 12 years off. I also had 2 children. So that, you know, that became sort of my main job in life. And I'm very happy to, you know, return to acting and to be acting again. But, you know, my heart is still as a mom. You know, that's kind of how I think of myself primarily, is as a mom of 2 kids. They're now both 7 and 9.5. And I still do a lot of work, you know, in advocacy for STEM and things like that. So, you know, I have a lot of different interests, and I wasn't planning on being a regular on a TV show again, but I'm very grateful, you know, that I'm employed now as an actor.
Cool. Big Bang Theory. You were presented with this opportunity, Amy Farrah Fowler. Are you happy with? First of all, how interested were you in the character when it was first presented to you? And the second part. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. The second part.
I was just going to ask, well, are you happy with the way the character has developed and evolved? Because I think there's been a lot of that over the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't, you know, I was called to audition for this part along with, you know, hundreds of other actresses in Hollywood, you know, who are trying to get work. I didn't get any special offer. I went and auditioned with a bunch of other women, and, you know, the initial part was in the season finale of season 3, and it was maybe 6 lines. Like, the character didn't have a name, she didn't have a career or a job, we didn't know really anything about her. So I was just brought on to do these couple lines. They didn't even know if this character would continue. So, yeah, she was very, you know, very understated in the first episode, and then when they brought me back in season 4, obviously we were allowed to flesh her out a little more, and then they just sort of, you know, it's all our writers. It's what it's the dynamics that they see between the actors and between the characters and all the fun that they get to have, writing these characters.
Okay. The stuff that you've been able to do, I mean, your character is sort of shown almost like I don't know if it's kind of an old-fashioned word to use, but like a body side to her personality beyond the exterior. Is there anything that you guys have touched on or done, or even just like lines that Amy's hit that have sort of they've challenged your comfort zone at all?
Not really. I mean, as an actor, you sort of have to do whatever's on the page, There are things I'm not great at as an actor, and those are things that our director, Mark Sandrowski, gets to work out with us,
Mm-hmm.
The acting drunk was not easy for me, but we made it through that. A lot of the scenes that Jim and I have where Amy and Sheldon are more intimate, I don't want to say that those are difficult or out of my comfort zone, but those are new things for us, as actors together.
Mm-hmm.
There's always kind of new things to learn, and I guess that's the fun thing about, having a great job, like working on Big Bang Theory. Our writers are constantly challenging us, and I'm fortunate enough to work with amazing actors who are ready to take on that challenge.
Okay. I think it's pretty safe to say that the relationship that your character and Jim Parsons' character has may be the most unique ever on TV. Certainly, it's got to be up there. How much input have you guys had in just maybe the little things about how you guys interact with each other and how that has sort of developed over the years?
None. That's all really our writers. As actors, our job is to take a script and make it right, make it funny in how it's performed. But every single thing that you see or that anyone sees that they love is an expression of our writers. There's a little bit of all of our characters in each of our writers. And that's what you're seeing. They're really, really talented people. And they seem to me a lot more like a group of intellectuals or academics rather than a group of comedy writers. They're just a really smart, interesting group of people, and they've produced all of these characters.
Okay. So looking at the Big Bang Theory in general, you were young when you were on Blossom, and you saw, some of the value that show had for families and kids who may have been watching. Now, as an adult and as a parent, from a different perspective, looking at the show you're on now, what are some of the values that maybe people can learn from the show? Obviously there's, the love of science. Science is cool. But even beyond that, is there anything else that you think might be beneficial that the show is kind of putting out there into the world?
I think our show demonstrates that there's someone for everyone. We have these characters who a lot of people would acknowledge are the kind of people that got teased and left out of things. And we are showing a group of characters that, all have jobs, and they have romantic relationships, and they have a social life, and no one's trying to medicate them or change them. Of course, they're not always happy with the way the others act, but it's not a show about changing people who are different. It's about living with people who are different. And I think that's really special. I also think the Amy and Sheldon relationship might be the longest-running non-sexual intimate relationship we've seen on television. I think that's really sweet. I think it's really it shows a lot of patience, and it shows a lot of love. And obviously, our season finale showed that Amy's a little bit fed up and needing to take some time to think. But for the most part, I think it's a very, very interesting relationship we've shown.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So beyond Big Bang Theory, which hopefully is going nowhere anytime soon, I don't think. But what are your other aspirations now that you're back? You've been back for years into acting full time. Is there anything you haven't done, or any other types of projects you'd consider or be interested in taking on?
There's a lot of things I haven't done. I haven't really done movies as an adult. I haven't really done drama as an adult. So there's a lot of things. I also, as I said, I do a lot of advocacy for science and women in science. So that's something I might explore. So yeah, there's still, I guess, a lot left to do.
do you have a desire to do drama specifically just because people have sort of known you in a comedic role for all these years, since your very early days? Is that something you kind of want to do just to show you can do it?
I don't know, just to show I can do it, but I think it's something that comedy actors are encouraged to do something different so that you are seen, as someone different.
Okay. I really only have one other question, and it's kind of the same question, but I'll ask it anyway. At the end of the day, we know you so well from sitcoms, but do you think of yourself more as a comedian or a comedic performer, or do you think of yourself more as an actor?
Gosh, that's a hard question. I guess I would prefer the more general term actor. But, obviously I'm known for being a comedian. When I think of comedian, I think of people like Melissa Rauch, who's an amazing comedian. Like, she did stand-up, and when she goes on a talk show, she can tell stories and anecdotes and things like that. I don't think of myself as a comedian like that, but I guess I'm an actor known for comedy. How's that?